On this episode of What the Ship, we update you on the latest ship happenings from around the world. I'm your host, Sal Mercogliano. Welcome to today's episode. It's been a while since we did What the Ship. We've been covering a lot of stories in between there, but I need to get caught up. Plus, there's a lot of updates out there on stories, and I'm going to touch on some stories, but we're going to go fuller into them with full episodes later this week. So before we jump into this, if you're new to the channel, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so be alerted about new videos as they come out. So this story by Mike Schiller over at G-Captain: ship losses hit historic low amid rising risks. Allianz has released their safety and shipping review. I do an annual review on this. I do a whole video. We're going to do the whole video on it. But it's interesting to note the global maritime industry has achieved its lowest ever total of vessel losses, with only 27 large ships lost worldwide in 2024, marking a 20% decrease from the previous year. This improvement stands in stark contrast to the 1990s, when the industry was losing more than 200 vessels annually. Now, that's going to sound strange to many of you, because if you watch my channel, we talk about a shipload of ship losses out there, and we're going to cover a batch of them today. I think a lot of that has to do with the visibility that is drawn to shipping today. There's a lot more people watching it than ever before. But even when we do talk about some of these incidents that do take place, we don't always see a ship loss. We may see a constructive total loss. We may see an issue regarding where a ship is severely damaged but later repaired. But we don't see the kind of the catastrophic sinkings at sea that we were seeing quite a few years ago. And it wasn't unusual to be losing, a ship a week in some cases. 27 large ship loss in 2024, that's one every 2 weeks. But it is still high visibility. And I think one of the big issues, too, is that ships have gotten bigger. The volume and velocity of cargo moves much faster. So there's a lot more attention to them. So we're going to head over to beautiful North Korea, and the Korean Central News Agency reporting that the destroyer that was damaged in a failed launch just over 2 weeks ago has been successfully launched and moved to a berth. While saying the 5,000-ton vessel requires re-examination, they are predicting the vessel will be fully repaired by the end of the month. It goes on here. The next stage of detailed restoration work will be carried out at the dry dock of the Ranjin ship repair plant, and the work period is expected to be 7 to 10 days. The official report was that the detailed underwater and internal inspection found no, quote, crater, but that the starboard side of the hull was, quote, scratched, and a certain amount of seawater had flooded into the structural passage in the stern. Okay, can we say that the North Koreans are in a severe case of denial on what just went wrong here? Let's look at some of the images here. This is the destroyer prior to launch, under construction here. You can see the large gantry crane over the vessel. Where things went amiss was during the side launch. And during the side launch, the ship is in a series of cradles on tracks. And to launch, the vessel has to slide completely in sync into the water, and then the cradles underneath the vessel are removed and the vessel will be floating. As you can see here, the bow of the vessel remained hung up on shore while the stern launched, and this caused the vessel to cant over and lay on its starboard right side. The blue tarps here, I have to imagine, are covering up damage to the vessel. A little bit of a better image here, and you can see the number of small craft that are around the area preparing to assist in the rolling of the vessel. It looks like they used a series of kind of almost salvage balloons or vessels here to kind of create some sort of lift on the starboard side so that they can roll it onto its port side and assist it. They may actually be lifting it here a bit to get it out and off the dock here and out into the middle of the slipway. This image now shows it out in the middle of the slipway there. It is straight back up. It's on an even keel, but it's probably resting on the bottom. I can't think of any reason why it would be sitting out in the middle of the slipway, not against the dock. They would have to go in, pump the water out, secure it, make sure that there's no cracks or flooding going in. If the ship had not cracked, they could pump it out and it should float immediately, but obviously it's not. They have to go in and do repairs. The amount of damage to the hull could be catastrophic. I'm not exactly sure that this vessel will be economically salvageable. I have a feeling that the Koreans will salvage the vessel because they don't want to lose faith. Should note that the accident has caused a lot of repercussions. According to the story from Maritime Executive, accident was called, quote, an unacceptable criminal act, with the Korean news agency saying that those responsible can never, cover up their crimes. They already announced the arrest of the deputy director of the munitions industry department, saying that he was largely responsible for this serious accident. That was on May 26th, and the previous day it had reported the arrest of the chief engineer of the Changjiang shipyard, the head of the shipbuilding assembly shop, and the administrative manager. Manager of the Changjiang shipyard had also been summoned by the judicial authorities. So unfortunately, it seems like the North Koreans are going to have some heads roll over this issue. Side launching ships are really difficult. It's a tough one to do, and you don't like to do it, even though we did it in the United States for the littoral combat ships. Up in Marinette for the Freedom class, that was largely done because there wasn't a dry dock to launch the vessels. You'd much rather launch ships in a dry dock because you have to attach a lot of things to the hull. You got to clear it off the hull. It's a process that does have some risk associated with it, and it appears for the Koreans it led them to a failed launch. You may remember that epic rescue initiated by the Royal Canadian Air Force for the crew of the MSC Baltic 3 that went aground off the coast of Newfoundland. Very dramatic, had a whole video on it. I'll have it linked above there. Royal Canadian Air Force Cormorant helicopter was able to hover over the grounded vessel and retrieve its entire crew in some really hazardous sea and wind conditions. I mean, it was absolutely epic. Well, since that grounding on February 15th, salvage operations have been ongoing. The area in and around the cove is much calmer now, as you can see. A salvage team on board the cargo ship EEMS Dublin has been alongside. MSC Baltic 3 has suffered hull damage. We can see that in cracks along the hull. It appears the ship may be splitting right down the center of the vessel. So they are at work offloading this 6,000 deadweight ton vessel, and particularly things they want to do is get the fuel oil off the vessel. You don't want to have a large fuel spill take place here, so they're in the process of pumping off the roughly 1,600 metric tons of fuel and marine gas oil. They also want to get the containers off the ship. The ship has a total of about 470 containers on board. About half are empty, and just this week they've been able to remove about 115 containers. They've got power back on the ship, so they've been able to use the ship's cranes. But the salvage operation is going to be very difficult because so much of this vessel is aground, because of the cracking midships on the vessel. They are obviously concerned that if they pull the vessel off, it could break apart and create more problems along the coast. Even though they're pumping off fuel and getting material off, there's always the potential for a hazardous material spill. Next, we go to the port of New York City and the movement of the Mexican training ship Cuauhtémoc. Here you see the vessel underway on June 6, assisted by tugs and pushboats of Don John Marine. You'll notice a large barge attached along the port side. That is to ease and facilitate the movement of the vessel by attaching that barge alongside. The tugs and towboats can push on the barge and maneuver the vessel. The vessel is being moved from its berth in Manhattan Pier 36 and is being moved across to the Brooklyn Navy Yard. Now, the Brooklyn Navy Yard is not an active Navy Yard any longer, but there are repair facilities that are being done there. And in particularly, GMD Shipyard is going to facilitate in some of the repairs of the vessel. Here's a ship coming into the Navy Yard now. So obviously a lot of issues still around this. The NTSB is conducting their investigation. They've been on board the vessel. The majority of the cadets have been flown back to Mexico. They're on board another vessel, a former U.S. Navy LST, to continue their training. Cuauhtémoc will have to be repaired, and particularly those broken masts or have to be cut down and removed from the ship. She can't sail in that condition with those masts looking to come down. Plus, hull inspections will need to be done so that the ship can sail for a repair yard. Obviously, the investigation is still going on. A lot of issues concerning the death of the two cadets on board. NTSB, U.S. Coast Guard involved in this. But again, you know, I've talked about this. I have a whole video on it where we discuss it. We'll say this, that the ship itself needed to ensure it was ready for sea. When they ordered that ship to go ahead, the ship went astern. That's either a mechanical or human issue. We can debate about the role of pilots, the role of the tug, everything on this. But when you order a ship to go ahead and it goes astern, that's the fundamental issue here, that this ship was not able to respond to the bell, the order to go ahead. And there's a lot of finger pointing, and granted, I just did a video where showing people pointing fingers at it for that reason. But I want to be clear that we do not know until we get the full investigation what is happening. What I've been trying to do is remove the issues that are out there that are just 100% not true. I mean, the issue about the ship was going to go under the bridge. It was never going to plan to go under the bridge. Everybody knew that the ship couldn't go under the bridge. This is a very difficult position. The crew on the tug, the pilot, the Navy crew on board the vessel, all have deep issues here because of the loss of life. And so we shouldn't mitigate it, and we should not minimize it for what it is. We're waiting for that full investigation to take place so that we can have some closure on that. Next, we head down to the bottom of the world, down to New Zealand with this story. New Zealand calls for banning substandard vessels based on a 2023 incident. So I did a video back in 2023 on a container ship called the Shiling. And the Shiling was a container vessel that serviced between the North and South Island of New Zealand all the way back to Singapore. Well, the Transport Accident Investigation Commission contends that the Singapore-registered Shiling, which had a notorious history of mechanical problems, should never have been allowed in New Zealand waters. The Commission is calling on the Ministry of Transport to pass a law giving the Maritime New Zealand the authority to ban certain ships from the country. The Australian Maritime Safety Authority has the powers, which is repeatedly utilized in banning ships deemed unsafe. AMSA, the Australian Maritime Safety Authority, uses that power extensively. Because of the fact that Australia and New Zealand basically have no domestic merchant marine, they are completely dependent on foreign ships to move cargo, not just in and out of their country, but in and around their country. And because they're at the end of a supply chain, a global supply chain that runs from East Asia, Singapore, down to Australia and New Zealand, they sometimes get the runt of the litter of ships down there. And Shiling is a perfect example with this. This ship experienced twice major engine failures within the span of a month. In 2023, this ship was classified as a high-risk vessel under the Tokyo Port State Control in 2018. And in 2020, the year after Shiling Navigation purchased the vessel, they had a series of deficiencies that were detected during inspections in Russia, China, and Chile. 19 deficiencies in 5 port state control deficiencies. However, Maritime New Zealand had no real authority to stop this vessel coming in. Maritime New Zealand had issued 16 deficiencies against the ship during 3 inspections between March 2022 and March 2023. And it also emerged that twice in February 2022 and July of 2022, Shiling suffered engine failures while arriving in the port of Wellington. I mean, this is a ship waiting for a problem. 2005 ship, built at Hyundai Heavy, 294 meters, 965 feet, 5,000 TEUs. It just was heading for a problem. On April 15th, 2023, Shiling was under pilotage coming into Wellington, and when the ship suffered a blackout, caused the main engine to stop. How many times have we talked about main engine blackouts? The ship carried itself into shoal waters of Falcon Shoal, where the bridge team succeeded in using both the ship's anchors to stop the ship from grounding. And then she was subsequently towed dead stick back to its berth. After that, the ship remained 25 days undergoing repairs. And then on May 10th, it departed. However, because of the fact the ship was there so long, oily water had accumulated in its storage tanks and eventually overflowed into the engine bilge room. And so that when the ship experienced heavy weather about 36 hours later on May 11th, the ship will lose power again, resulting in a mayday being issued for the ship. The ship was towed back into the sheltered waters of Golden Bay and eventually back to Wellington. And then for the next 45 days, the ship remained undergoing a survey. It wasn't until July 7th the ship was allowed to depart. This is a story of an epic failure of a vessel. And it's the reason why New Zealand, Australia, South Africa, and numerous other countries are looking at this and sitting there saying, hang on, we are dependent on these foreign shipping firms to give us ships that we intend to be safe operating to deliver our cargo for us. And because New Zealand's at the tail end of a supply chain, it gets the worst ships. And now we're seeing issues about trying to create ships to at least provide reasonable and secure service in and around their islands for them. Because if not, a ship like the Shiling is going to result in a massive maritime disaster, which New Zealand has experienced in the past with ships like the Rena. All right, we head north from New Zealand up to off the coast of Alaska, where the Morning Midas, the Liberian-flagged car carrier that has been abandoned by its crew, is still afire in the North Pacific. Coast Guard overflew the vessel on Wednesday, June 4th, to take these images. You can still see fires emanating from the vessel on the aft end. Now, the Coast Guard said that the ship seems to be on an even keel, but it's hard to see that here. She actually looks a bit down by the stern. One of the things to note is the darkened areas of the ship here. You can see where the ship has suffered extreme heat across it, with smoke visible from the ship. Interesting, we didn't get an infrared view of the vessel, but here you can see that smoke emanating. The heat is expanding. It seems to be limited on the deck just above, and then you do have a slick coming from the vessel. The slick is the most telling issue, I will tell you, because that could indicate that the fire has gotten down into the engine room. On the starboard side, you'll notice the lifeboat is launched here. The Coast Guard has retracted the statement that they got off in a life raft. They say they left the vessel on a lifeboat. But notice how the burn marks are higher up. You can see that flame emanating here. That means the fire has breached the fire deck where it initiated. The latest Coast Guard update has 3,048 vehicles on board, 70 fully electrical and 681 partial hybrid on board. We know that Resolve Marine has been tasked with the salvage operation, a tug sortied from Alaska heading that way. However, because of the distance involved, it won't be until June 9th that firefighting tug can arrive in the area. The ship is about 340 miles southwest of Adak, Alaska. That's a really kind of middle of nowhere site for them to go. And they will have the capability to survey the vessel and, if possible, board the vessel and begin either fire suppression or towing the vessel. You have this story over at Lloyd's List. The race is on to save Zodiac Maritime's vehicle carrier. The ongoing Morning Midas incident is the 13th series fire on board a deep-sea Ro-Ro type ship in the past 10 years. Rob Wilmington in this story included this table here that gives you a pretty good breakdown of those major fires he was talking about. Going back to 2015, you have the fire on board the Courage in the English Channel. That resulted in the total loss of the vessel. 2016 at Antwerp, the Silver Sky, Sincerity Ace in 2018. All three of those total losses. 2019, the Grande America, that is Grimaldi Line, that vessel sank. You have the Diamond Highway in 2019. That ship was repaired in the South China Sea. Ho Chi Minh, which I have featured on this channel before, talked about it. Near disaster, almost resulted did result in the injuries to 9 firefighters. Could have been much more severe. But that ship was repaired. Felicity Ace 2022, that ship sank in the North Atlantic. Gran Costa d'Avorio, that ship in Newark, New Jersey, resulted in the death of 2 firefighters on board. Fremantle Highway was a total loss. That was the ship in 2023. That one, it resulted in the death of one of its crew. You have the Anshin in the South China Sea. That ship was repaired. Grande Congo, another Grimaldi Line ship, was repaired. Grande Brazil, yes, once again, Grimaldi Lines in the English Channel, and now Morning Midas. So a lot of issues with these car carriers. I really want to get an episode together with my good buddy Patrick Durham over at Stash D Training, and maybe bring on board some experienced firefighters, talk about this issue. What are we facing regarding these fires? I'll be clear. I don't know what started this fire. We don't know, but I have to say this again. If you have a fire on board a car carrier that involves electrical vehicles, it's a major problem. It's a major problem because it is almost impossible to put out a fire involving electrical vehicles, because once they're involved and once the batteries are impacted, you create issues. Even though the standard now is to get the batteries down to 30%, you can't get lower than that. That's still a lot of energy that's harnessed in there, and the traditional use of carbon dioxide to create an atmosphere that doesn't allow combustion doesn't work with electric vehicle batteries because they produce oxygen. So while you can prevent the spread of the fire to other vehicles, you can't stop the fire itself. And that heat buildup will resonate through the vessel, through the steel decks, up, down, and side to side. And because of the nature of the car carriers, as we talked about in the initial episode we did on this, it's very difficult to stop. Next, we head up to England and the collision between Stena Immaculate and Solong. Stena Immaculate was involved in a collision. It was at anchor off of Hull in Great Britain, and the ship was rammed by a container ship, the Solong. Solong, at 16 knots, ran into the port side of the Stena Immaculate, creating a huge massive fire. Stena Immaculate was carrying jet fuel. The Solong had containers up forward that were loaded with, not kidding you, whiskey, Scotch whiskey coming down. And the fire was massive. The crew did their best to try to save the vessel. Unfortunately, the fire was ravaging under control. Jet fuel had spilled out into the ocean, kind of surrounded the vessel, and so the crew abandoned ship. But before they abandoned ship, they had set the fire monitors. And so the ship actually remained afloat. And here you see it being towed into Great Yarmouth. Interesting side story is that because power was remaining on the vessel, they had actually kept power up on the vessel. Salvage crews were able to get on board. They salvaged all the meat that was in the freezers and donated it to a local charity in the area. I thought it was just a very good kind of story coming from this event. Meanwhile, the captain of the Solong, a Russian, Vladimir Mutin, 59, of St. Petersburg, has been arraigned in English court on the charge of manslaughter. Pled not guilty to the case. One of the crew members on board Solong, a 38-year-old Filipino crew member, Mark Angelo Perina, was killed, and he was charged, the captain was charged with gross negligence manslaughter over the death. Moten was remanded in custody, and his trial date has been set for 12 January. In the meantime, both vessels have been moved into port, and obviously Solong, so heavily damaged as you can see there up forward, probably very unlikely that this ship will be salvaged. Stena Immaculate, unsure whether or not that ship gets salvaged because of the damage, but I just do think it is interesting to note that both ships remained afloat. And this is something, again, that we talk about with safety is ships aren't sinking as much because they're built to a standard now that's much stronger than we've seen in the past. Plus, one of the things you have to remember, in the area where this collision took place, a lot of salvage and firefighting apparatus and assets were on scene to assist in this effort. All right, I just want to run through some other stories, and we're going to talk about them just very briefly because we're going to do full videos on them as they come out this week. So this story, Transpacific freight rates surge amid Trump tariff turmoil. We talked about that this was going to happen, and we've seen it. The Drewry Index climbed 41% this week. So you may remember we talked quite a bit here about containers and the issue with the 145% tariff that went to China. Well, when President Trump rescinded the tariff, lowered it down to 30%, we created a bubble that's moving through the supply chain. And if you look at the latest numbers that are out here by Descartes, they show you that in April, we saw the import of containers into the United States at 2.4 million TEU, 20-foot equivalent unit. That is the second highest, only to what we saw happen in 2022. Now, we expect this number to drop. I'm going to say 1.8 million is going to be my guess here, what we see the drop for May. That is that bubble. Well, then we're going to see a big, huge uptick coming into June, potentially into July. Here's the data for freight rates from Drewry showing you the trade routes from Shanghai, and they just go through the roof. I mean, just a massive climb up. Seeing them across the board, Shanghai to New York be spiking just under about 7,000 right now. Shanghai to Los Angeles right around 6,000. Shanghai to Genoa coming in at about 4,000, and Shanghai to Rotterdam about 3,000. All of that is because now with the removal of, or I should say removal, the reduction of the tariffs down to 30%. I know they're not all 30% because you've got steel, aluminum, you got a whole batch of other tariffs on top of it. We can see anywhere from 30 to 55% tariffs coming out of China. Everybody's ordering to get cargo over here before that tariff goes back up in August. So everybody's kind of having, we had the front loading in January through April. Now we're going to have the mid loading here during the summer months coming in so that everything will be in place before we go into the holiday season. And that is causing a massive spike in the rates because there's not enough capacity out there for it. Carriers are adding about 400,000 TEU from the Asia to the West Coast routes. This is happening concurrently with the ocean carriers recycling ships on their routes, repositioning vessels, particularly getting Chinese-built vessels off their routes. And at the same time, we're seeing congestion and overloading in ports in Europe. So all of that is impacting shipping right now. It's going to have a detrimental effect on shipping because what we're seeing is this pendulating sine wave here. You know, we never have this kind of smooth flow. I mean, when you look at 2024 here in purple, you see how it begins to dip down and after Q1 and then starts climbing and then drops back down again. This is typically what we tend to see. But again, it's never a smooth flow. We're not like moving the same amount of containers every month. The problem that we're doing now because of the tariffs is we're just creating these massive dips and spikes. That causes cost issues, it creates reliability issues, it just causes chaos across the supply chain. And for the consumer, for the shipper, it's a big problem. For the carriers, they love this because freight rates are through the roof. And for them, they love this. They love this. It's good money for them. In another story, you remember how we had this idea of a shipbuilding renaissance in the United States? Well, that may be going out the window very quickly here. Stories over at GCAP and Department of Homeland Security canceled a $260 million Coast Guard cutter contract with Huntington Ingalls. This is for the 11th of the Legend-class national security cutters. They have built 10 of them so far. The 11th was under construction with a 12th under option, but the head of the Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, announced today that they're canceling the 11th vessel and obviously the 12th vessel. Add to it, the Coast Guard is suspending construction of 2 new offshore patrol cutters. OPCs were designed to replace the mid-range cutters, what were the Bear-class 270-foot cutters, and the old 210 class cutters, which were really, really old. OPCs, the Argus class, was coming out. 4 of them were being built at Eastern Shipbuilding in Panama and Panama City, Florida, and then the others were being built at Austal. However, none of them have been built yet. The Argus has been launched, but it's been a long, drawn-out affair. There's a couple of reasons for this. Eastern got hit by a massive hurricane that just completely threw them off schedule. Plus, Eastern is building a ship that they really have not much experience in building a ship this size, and so that is causing a lot of delays. Well, now Eastern is losing 2 of the 4 ships it's building, and we have yet to see the vessel come out from Austal, which is creating problems for the Coast Guard because their medium-sized cutters are not coming online, and their cutters are extremely old. Matter of fact, they're laying them up now, and so there's going to be a gap here, and I'm really interested if the Coast Guard takes an approach like they did with the icebreaker they got from the commercial industry, which they just put back into service, had a refit done in Tampa. Will the Coast Guard start grabbing workboats? Will they go to Bollinger, which is building the fast response cutters, have them continue building them? There's a lot of options, but more importantly, we're seeing a lot of chaos across the shipbuilding area. For example, this story over at USNI News, HII, Huntington Ingalls, Newport News Shipbuilding furloughs 471 shipbuilders. Now, Huntington Ingalls builds the aircraft carriers. They're building the nuclear aircraft carriers, the Ford class, but they also build nuclear submarines, so they have their hand in the Virginia and the Columbia class. And one of the things that has been talked about repeatedly is that we need more shipyard workforce, but here's this story of 471 shipbuilders being laid off. Now, I'm hearing rumors this has to do with an issue that came up last year regarding welding in some of the ships done by Huntington Ingalls. There was an issue with substandard welds that did not meet the criteria that was set out. They're not bad welds. It's just they weren't at the level that was required by the contract, and this could be a cleaning house of that. We're hearing rumors about it, nothing confirmed yet. But if you're in a shipbuilding effort and furloughing 471 workers does seem a problem, particularly when you have this executive order out there that's talking about building ships. Now, I should note that the executive order had a series of timelines on it. Some of the timelines have been met. For example, within 30 days, they were supposed to start working on refurbishing the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy. They've appointed someone to oversee that. That's good. But Section 19 here, within 45 days of the order, the Secretary of Defense, Commerce, Transportation, and Homeland Security shall conduct a review of shipbuilding for the U.S. government use and submit a report to the President with recommendations. There's no indication, at least not publicly, that such a report has been done, and that was due previously. It was due back in the middle of May, and we haven't seen that yet. Haven't heard anything out of the Office of Shipbuilding over in the National Security Council. We have the new Ships Act that's been introduced, heading out to committees, which is good. Hopefully we'll get that Maritime Security Advisor and that Maritime Security Board to oversee this. But right now, there's supposed to be some goals, and we have a whole series of goals coming out in mid-July that have to be met. So I do have a question about whether shipbuilding in the United States is staying on track. The White House wants this done. Now, I keep hearing it out of them that shipbuilding is a priority issue for the United States. I just want to make sure that it's still meeting the obligations as set out by the executive order and hopefully by the Ships Act. Then we get this story here from Captain Reuters. Red Sea shipping traffic rises after Houthis narrowed targets. Red Sea marine traffic has increased by 60% to 36 to 37 ships a day since August 2024, but is still short of volumes seen before Yemen's Houthis began attacking ships in the region, according to the commander of EU Aspides naval mission. This chart out on Twitter shows you vessels going through the region here. In particular, you look at the change in numbers of vessels going through the Suez Canal. What we're seeing is less than a 40% reduction in the total number of ships going through. Car carriers probably the most impacted. About 90% of car carriers route around. Containers, about less than half route around. We're seeing this for crude tankers, less than 20%. For dry bulk, a little over 40%. For LNG tankers, about 45%. Almost no impact on liquefied petroleum gas tankers. And then product tankers are about a little over 30%. And you'll see here that the vessel uptick is increasing ever slightly here. Containers inching up just a little bit here, and particularly where you start seeing it, LPG carriers are really inching up. LNG is starting to come up, and oil tankers and dry bulk coming up. All that indicates that, listen, the Houthis have announced that their target is going to be Israeli vessels and U.S. vessels. And we have definitely seen the impact here against Israelis. If you look at the port of Eilat on the southern coast of Israel in the Red Sea, it has declared bankruptcy, and there's almost no vessel traffic that goes into that southern port across from Jordan. Instead, nearly all Israeli shipping goes in through the ports on the Mediterranean. The Houthi announced that they're blockading the port of Haifa. I don't know how the frick they're going to do that, but they say they're going to do it. But I will say this, they're doing a good impact against the United States shipping. And the reason I know that is because of this. This is marine traffic showing you all ships, U.S. flag ships around the world. You'll notice here there are no ships sailing through the Red Sea, through the Bab el-Mandab. We will get ships heading into Djibouti here, running along the Gulf of Aden, which will be escorted by U.S. naval vessels. But that's about it, mainly because Djibouti is a U.S. military base, so there's a requirement to get vessels in there. But I will give you one vessel in particular, and it's this vessel right here. This is the USNS Private Dwayne T. Williams. This is a maritime prepositioning vessel. This is a ship that is used by the U.S. Marine Corps. It's operated by contract mariners of the U.S. Merchant Marine under contract to the Military Sealift Command to preposition marine equipment around the world. The ship is up in Suda Bay in Greece right now for an exercise. This is the track of the vessel from when she originally left Guam, sailed through the South China Sea, through the Malacca Strait, spent some time over in Diego Garcia. But when the ship had to deploy from Diego Garcia to head to Suda Bay, the shortest route would have been via the Bab el-Mandab, cheers, up through the Red Sea. But instead, that vessel progressed all the way around Africa and through the Straits of Gibraltar into the Mediterranean. Now, we just conducted a massive 3-4 month campaign against the Houthis with the Truman Battle Group. We've had another battle group move into the area of the Vincent. Here's a vessel owned by the U.S. government. She's a USNS vessel, United States Naval vessel, contract operated, carrying Marine Corps equipment on board, and yet that vessel had to divert around Africa. You can make arguments all you want whether the Houthis are effective or not. That seems to be an effective interdiction of trade going through. I don't want to risk merchant mariners. I don't want to put merchant mariners at risk at all because the Houthi have said they will target U.S. vessels. However, you are allowing the Houthi to influence the movement of U.S. vessels for military exercises. And I think that is an issue that needs to be addressed. Last story I have is one that I've been looking forward to reporting on because it's one that has a lot of passion among many of us in the maritime industry and something that needed to be done for a long friggin' time. And it's this one. Department of Justice files criminal charges against ship captain for sexual assault at sea. Department of Justice has filed criminal charges against former ship captain John Maroney for allegedly drugging and sexually assaulting a U.S. Merchant Marine Academy cadet aboard the American flag cargo ship Liberty Glory. The charges filed in the Eastern District of New York mark the first DOJ prosecution for sexual assault aboard a U.S. commercial vessel in over, take a guess, 40 years, according to counsel in the case. According to the indictment, Maroney faces 5 criminal counts for events occurring on September 8, 2019, while traveling from Bahrain to Corpus Christi. Charges include aggravated sexual abuse for allegedly drugging and rendering the female victim unconscious before sexually assaulting her, sexual abuse for engaging in sexual acts while the victim was incapable of consent, and 3 counts of abusive sexual contact related to non-consensual sexual contact while the victim was either unconscious or incapable of consent. This is, I can't even tell you how heinous of an act this is and how much I wish we could just throw him overboard or keel haul him, drag him, do whatever we have to do to someone who does something like this to a female midshipman on board a vessel. It is just heinous. These cadets go on vessels. They're very small crews. They're almost male dominated, and they have very little recourse. And these women, in this case, along with several other cases that have been out there, all talk about the fact that they feel themselves completely exposed. They can't even lock themselves in the room because a ship's captain or a lot of the senior officers have keys to every room. You literally are sleeping at night worried that someone can come into your room and take advantage of you. And then what recourse do you have because you're stuck on a ship? And who are they going to believe, the cadet or the ship's master? And the fact that this is only the first case being prosecuted in 40 years, if you think the maritime industry was without sexual abuse for 40 years, you're mistaken. But it is just absolutely insane. I've said this before and I'll say it again. When I was a mariner, if you're a mariner right now, and if you spill 50 gallons of oil in water in a harbor, you're going to lose your license. You're going to have the Coast Guard, you're going to have the EPA, you're going to have so many people investigating up your butt that you will not know what just happened to you. Yet, if you scream sexual assault, nothing at all. And it is insane. It is absolutely insane that we are in an industry that this is allowed to happen. I am so happy he's being prosecuted. I hope they throw the book at him. I hope he never sees the light of day ever again. And I hope every shipping company, every mariner, all the unions, everybody involved here take note of this, that this can no longer be the norm. You can't hide this anymore. It has to be in the light of day. And we need to do things to fix this. The Maritime Administration has created what's called the Embark program to provide safety for those mariners, those cadets going on board U.S. commercial vessels. We need to expand that to Military Sealift Command because Military Sealift Command operates outside the commercial norm. They're a military norm. We need to expand the system to that. Need to make sure that all the state maritime academies that have cadets going out on commercial vessels, and more importantly, just people in general, have a ability. In today's society, there should be no reason. Those are U.S. territories. A U.S. vessel at sea is American territory. Department of Justice, FBI, Coast Guard have statutory obligations to investigate and ensure that they are safe environments for everyone. It's no different than being attacked and assaulted walking down a street in the United States than it is being on a ship. Just me on my soapbox. Sorry, it gets me very fired up this story and the fact that it's taken 40 years to bring a case against someone, and Maroney I'm hoping that he will rot in jail for a long time. Sorry, it's the way I feel about it. Hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. Leave a comment, share it across social media, and if you can, support the page. How do you do that? Hit the super thanks button down below, or head on over to Patreon and become a monthly, yearly subscriber. Until our next episode, Sal, signing off.